Hello, Team Minot. I'm Mr. J. I'm your community support coordinator and the host of the You Matter Roundtable. This is our weekly podcast where we're helping agency experts answer your questions and discuss topics to help our community members navigate some of the challenges that they may face in regards to their spiritual, social, mental, and physical well-being. I have some subject matter experts with me today. Let's let them introduce themselves. Chaplain Pitts, we'll go ahead and start with you. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Rob Pitts. I'm a 91st Maintenance Group, True North Chaplain. I'm glad to be on this panel today.
Sergeant Ellis.
Hello, everyone. Master Sergeant Moses Ellis, First Sergeant for the 5th Medical Group. Thank you for the invite. Happy to be here today.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kilgore. I'm a psychologist here in the Minot Mental Health Clinic.
Awesome. So, excellent to have all of you on the panel today. So before we actually get into our discussion, I'd like to acknowledge that we did receive one question last week. The question simply was, what are your thoughts on living in the dorms and marriage? Which is a very loaded question. I think we could probably talk about that for days trying to figure out exactly what this person was looking for. So if you're the one that submitted that question, would like to have us answer it, please either reach out to me directly or give us a little bit more detail through the app, the Minot, Team Minot app on the phone. Tell us what you're looking for and we'll get you an answer. So this week, we thought it might be helpful to have a discussion about the impact of recent events on our nation. Of course, I'm referring to the tragic death of George Floyd and the ensuing protests, riots, and social debates. We'll discuss how this has affected us as individuals and as a community. And we'd also like to talk about the concept of advocacy. So let's start with what effect recent events have had on our panel members. Sergeant Ellis, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you and let you start this part of the conversation.
Sure thing. Thank you, sir. For me, it's kind of threefold. One, obviously, being a Black man in America. Two, just being an American citizen. And three, serving in the Air Force as a first sergeant. So all those provide a different perspective and a different lens for me. Obviously, the Black community right now is hurt due to the untimely and unjustly death of George Floyd. And it's become a thing that has become commonplace almost with some of these things and some of these issues that continue to rise. So there's that voice that I have in me that wants to understand why and that cry for social justice and that equality that the Black community is always asking for and striving to get. And then there's just the American citizen part of me of seeing that our nation right now is torn apart. There's a great divide happening on who's wrong, who's right, what can we do to fix it, what can we do to stop it. And obviously those are causing clashes right now, as we can see, between the riots and the protests. And if you're on social media, there's a lot of just foul things happening right now. And some of them can be from friends that I've had for years and putting up their opinions that may not necessarily sit right with me. And likely when or same for true, when I put my opinions up, maybe they don't believe in what I'm saying. And so that's causing a little bit of tension amongst folks. And then again, just serving in the military, right? We're supposed to be the silent sentinels in this and kind of watch from afar because obviously wearing the uniform comes with a big pride and responsibility. And we try to distance ourselves from this, so to say, because you don't want it to appear that the military is picking sides in this. But I think it was Chief Wright came out, Chief Master Sergeant Wright came out a few days ago and kind of put his perspective. And I thought that was a really amazing thing for him to do because it showed that, yes, even though we wear the uniform, we still are citizens and we still are able to share our voice with this. We have to do so, correctly and try to avoid the political angle of it. But we do suffer with what happens in this world. We are citizens with this world. So it's just been a crazy few days with all this going on. Obviously, I've had friends reach out to me, both, my Black friends, my minority friends. We've had our conversations. And then, of course, I've had former troops and former co-workers that are white have reached out to me just trying to get understanding, and I can appreciate that, or offering apologies, which is always the weird thing, like, hey, you don't have to apologize to me. I get it. I appreciate it, but just trying to provide them perspective of what it looks like to kind of be a Black citizen, a Black man in America.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Chaplain Pitts, what about you?
So for me, I'm in a unique position because I look Filipino, but actually I am half Korean and half Black. So I'm a undercover brother on both sides. and that throughout my whole life, I've been able to, I guess, connect with multiple sides of society, whether it's, celebrating Kwanzaa with my Black side of the family, or enjoying some bibimbap with my Korean harmony, to even now, I've been married almost, it's strange to say this, but I've been married now for 19 years, and my wife is a beautiful white woman. Our kids, we have 5 kids, and because of our mixes, they look Puerto Rican. So our household looks like the United Nations even by itself. So over the past couple of weeks, I mean, honestly, it's been mixed, because obviously I'm mixed, but I grew up in a predominantly, white, middle class type of life, even though my parents are obviously multicultural. But the past couple of weeks, it's been interesting conversations, with my wife, with friends, seeing things like Sergeant Ellis mentioned about social media posts and people reaching out at work, or even having crucial conversations, with my own kids about what's been going on. For me personally, I keep going back to, we can't just treat what's been going on the past couple of weeks as like a black-white issue, or police civilian issue. It's the human issues that we're dealing with. It's human problems, and how can we deal with human problems and not try to sweep things under the rug, but really try to be agents of change in the days and weeks ahead. So that's really been running through my mind over the past couple of weeks.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Kilgore.
Yeah. So just to echo what everybody said, the past couple weeks have been very interesting, personally and professionally. I think professionally, we've had a lot of people reach out to the mental health clinic and the helping agencies and try to figure out how to navigate this situation. And what's been really striking to me is it's not only people that want resources and want help with dealing with the frustration, but a lot of commanders and a lot of people in the community that just want to understand, how do I have these difficult conversations? So that has been actually one of the good reframes that's come out of like all the chaos and all the discomfort and difficult feelings that we're having, is I've had a lot of people that really never thought about having these conversations actually recognize that they need to get uncomfortable and they need to have these conversations. And so we've had a lot of people reaching out. So professionally, like, that has been great that people want to have those conversations and being able to guide that. And I think being able to embrace the suck, both personally and professionally, is kind of what I've been doing, that we don't have all the answers. We don't know the right things to say. And we can try to be good listeners, but we just have to be there and try to use this experience to elucidate change in some way. Personally, it's been interesting. I've had a conversation with a few people just about my own background. As the other people on the panel shared, I'm from a mixed background, a multi-ethnic, multiracial background. And so I've definitely had experiences in my family of racism and discrimination and things that I buried long ago and hadn't thought much about. And these experiences have brought up things that myself or my family have gone through. And I think it helps me recognize that still might not help me understand other people's experiences. That yes, I might have had my own, but I can't even pretend to know what other folks are going through. We all have a different experience. And so it's good that I have some understanding, but absolutely still upset and just trying to get through it like everybody else. Even as a helping professional, we still feel it, and we're still upset, and we're just trying to figure out how to navigate it just like everybody else.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really appreciate the differing viewpoints, but I heard some common themes. That this isn't just a a black-white issue. That there are a lot of different moving components to this, right? There's the issue of police brutality and what does that look like? And you know, for me, I'm about as white bread as you can come. I grew up in central Wisconsin. You know, a middle class white family. Not a whole lot of color in the community that I grew up in. Not a whole lot of cultural difference. You had to drive about 45 minutes down into Milwaukee to experience any cultural difference. And so I wasn't exposed to a whole lot growing up. But really my introduction into multiculturalism was when I joined the Air Force, which I think was really good for me. You know, I see a lot of my friends posting now stuff about, you know, it doesn't matter what color, race, creed, religion you are. When you're serving together, you got each other's back. And I think that's nice and it sounds really ideal. And I think it's probably more true than you'll find in a lot of civilian sectors, but I don't think it's entirely true. And I hear this term white privilege, and my natural reaction when I hear that is I want to push back because I don't feel privileged. I've had struggles, I've had to work through things, and so what I get caught up in isn't what I'm being told, it's what I'm hearing. This particular go around, and it's unfortunate because this isn't the first time our country has struggled with this, right? Either police brutality or you know, some type of social injustice where we keep coming back to this conversation. And you know, and I've been challenged to look at life a little bit differently, to step out of my comfort zone, look through other folks' shoes, which has not been an easy task at times, and not being defensive about it because I've worked with everybody on this panel. I would argue that I don't have a racial bone in my body. It's just not how I operate. But I'm blind to certain things because I don't have to deal with them on a regular basis. And the issue of police brutality, somebody pointed out to me, they said, and I think I read this on Facebook, because where do you get any of your information anymore, right? They said, well, you know, for those of you that say all cops aren't bad, that's me. What if American Airlines said, you know, 10 out of our 10,000 pilots are, only 10% of our 1,000 pilots crash their planes in the mountains? You know, is that an acceptable rate of failure? No, you're in a position where failure is not acceptable. So I think we've got work to do there as well. And in terms of, you know, those are two different conversations. They're definitely linked together, especially by an event. But the fact that this conversation about race relations in the United States has come up again tells me we're not anywhere closer than I thought we were a month ago, or even a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, before all this happened. So, but one thing I do appreciate is, especially in our community, is this desire to communicate. And so there's a willingness to have these difficult conversations, and take ownership. And so this has been eye-opening for me on a lot of levels. Moving forward, so Dr. Kilgore, I'm going to let you kind of lead off the next section. So we're talking about having difficult conversations. We're talking about people that may have conversations they want to have, or maybe need somebody to talk to. And then we get into this concept of advocacy. And I wondered if you could kind of lay out in terms of this conversation, what does advocacy look like? And then we'll open it up to the panel for a little bit more discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been so many people lately that want to get involved, and a lot of questions about, you know, how do I advocate? What is advocacy? You know, what does it mean for me to be an advocate? And so the way that I help people through that process and through my own process is basically, advocacy is participation. That advocacy is how you show up for the things in your life, or participate in the things in your life that matter. And it can actually be active or passive. Some people can be participating in something that they value in a more passive capacity. So that can be difficult for some folks to try to figure out, how do I do something in order to get involved? And for some people, it's less of doing and it's more of a feeling or a thinking or a change in their mindset is actually how they become an advocate. So just the brief bullet points that advocacy is participation. It's how you show up. It's active and it's passive. And it's also a choice that you can choose to be an advocate, and you can choose to not be an advocate and not participate in certain things that you don't want to.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. So speaking of being an advocate, how can you or how do you advocate from your professional lens? Does it involve speaking, doing, watching, teaching, showing, modeling, empowerment? Is there some other mix? Are you more of an active or a passive advocate? I think those are all great points that we could talk about, especially in our current environment where I think advocacy is more required now than maybe ever before. So Sergeant Ellis, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you to start off that part of our conversation.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dr. Kilgore, for that. One of the things that stuck out to me most with that was changing that mindset. And I believe that is a very big part of it. That's that passive, active part kind of coming together, because a lot of the issues that I deal with as a first sergeant, of course, my job first and foremost is to take care of people, right? Without people, the mission doesn't happen. And a lot of the issues that I come across are people having a two different mindsets, right? Creating conflict. And a lot of times I believe it boils down to people needing to sit and listen to each other and learn from each other. And that's a powerful, listening is a powerful thing that I think is very underrated, that we don't do enough. A lot of the times when somebody's coming to my office with an issue, it's just me simply sitting there listening to them. And 9 times out of 10, just that's what they need, and they can solve the problem on their own. But going forth, if they do need to advocate, or they do need me to advocate for them, it's always just trying to understand their perspective of things. And I always ask the question of, what's your intent with this? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And I think that needs to happen more often to help with some of these issues. That's that active piece of putting it back on the person for a second or two before you go forward and carry out whatever mission that they're giving to you to do in that shape of advocacy, whether it be me advocating on your behalf to the commander because of a policy that might be affecting things that we just didn't think about down to the lowest level, the tactical level, whether it be me going over to the MPF for you to talk to a person, or something quite as simple as having another member come into my office, advocate on your behalf just because you two or you three aren't getting along and it's causing tension in the workplace. But I think a lot of it goes back to that key word of what you're saying, of just that mindset, willing to understand that you don't, or to know that you don't know everything, and be willing to be flexible in your thinking and your mindset. Because even I, as a first sergeant, learn. I'm still in a position to learn from others. And so I always go into everything with an open mind before I take any type of action.
And I'm
I love what you said. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I love what you said, Sergeant Ellis, about listening. That is from a professional lens, how I can be an advocate for my folks. Is the important piece about listening and about my job is listening to hear them, not listening to agree or disagree or challenge. No, being a good listener is truly hearing somebody and being able to empathize with their experience. And so being an advocate for me, whether it's personal or professional, is truly being able to provide that ear and to provide that safe space that we can talk about anything. And it is what it is. There's no need to get to a point where we agree or disagree. It's just a space that we can kind of change our mindset and also be able to be flexible in thought and take each other's perspectives. That perspective taking piece is a huge part of being a participant in advocacy. So thanks for sharing that, because I definitely agree and have a common movement as well.
Chaplain Pitts, you want to add anything to this part of our conversation?
Yes. So Sergeant Ellis touched on the big point about mindset. And over the past few weeks, that's been that's been an emphasis in my focus as well. My religious affairs counterparts, Sergeant Hefner, he and I were a part of a training about developing an outward mindset a few weeks ago. And we've been trying to implement some of those principles in our day-to-day of how we engage with airmen and how to help with airmen and their family members, and even advising our leadership within the group. This developing an outward mindset is a big shift, because you can be outwardly nice, or even like North Dakota nice or Southern hospitality nice, but you can also still be about you. You're about your own focus on your own goals, your own objectives, your own challenges. But with the outward mindset, it's a shift from the inward to the outward. You're focusing on the other person's objectives, the other person's goals, the other person's challenges. And it does involve listening. It does involve teaching and communicating. It involves building relationships with them and other people that influence them. Because more often than not, our Air Force system can focus so much on correction, right? If a behavior is not, quote unquote, right or on the right path, we go automatically into correction mode and not developing a mindset first. You know what? Why is this person even on this path in the first place? And what can I do even in a small way to help them? Like Sergeant Ellis was mentioning about doing those little things to help build relationship and being an advocate for someone. So as we have been trying to shift as a chaplain corps team the past few weeks, we have seen the dividends already in shifting our mindset, not being inward, but to be outward.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I think, and I heard listening a whole bunch as all three of you talked, and how important that is. So, I hear a lot on the media and social media and from some other folks that I know that, now is the time for us to communicate and have an open dialogue. And those of you that know me know I love to talk. Listening, though, is super important at this time. And Sergeant Ellis, I loved what you said about, pausing, giving that person a moment to reflect, let them get out what they need to get out. Chaplain Pitts, my wife and I have had this conversation so many times. When an airman, and a big A, right, does something wrong, we're quick, especially if you're in a management or leadership position, to want to squash the behavior and get them on the right path. And what I'm hearing and what I truly believe from the bottom of my heart is the very first thing we should be doing is listening. What's going on with you? What's different? Why is this happening? Understanding that some people won't be able to make that connection, and will, you make enough mistakes, or not mistakes. If you cause enough damage, if you do enough of the wrong thing, that path leads a certain direction. But are we giving folks the opportunity to talk? And then I think about our current environment and the desire for an open dialogue. I think you have to go in with open heart, open mind, right? Grace and space. Empathy is huge. And I'm thinking, what are those empathy blockers? What gets in the way of being able to be a good listener? And when we were talking about how the recent situations have affected us individually, I started thinking, one of my empathy blockers is my own experience. So if somebody's sharing something that I can't relate to, I may automatically, I don't know what you're talking about, I can't relate to it, and then I want to turn it off. And so having the self-awareness to be able to notice when I'm feeling that way, so that I can knock that down, because to be able to truly listen is listening with empathy. I'm seeking to understand, not just listening so that I can respond to your next thing. So I think those are all really great points. Does anybody have anything they want to add in terms of advocacy?
Yes, just all great points. This has been a great panel, and I think each person's picked a great piece and ran with it. And especially in the next coming days, weeks, months, especially as this unrest continues to develop across our nation, and people are hurting and people are suffering. I think it's important to understand that there's going to be two sides to this. There's going to be what we do in our civilian sides, right, when we're at home and we've hung the uniform up for the day, and we're sitting home relaxing and searching the web and watching the news and the media. And then there's going to be that perspective of when we put the uniform on, because that changes things. It's unfortunate, but it does, right? There's rules and guidelines out there about how deep those discussions can get at work, because we have to kind of keep the workplace free of those types of things, because it can leak and cause other issues. But I think this advocacy piece is going to be really important on both sides of the house, because obviously what's happening, quote unquote off duty is going to trickle in on duty, because people are going to be clearly affected by this. There's people who serve who are going to be from these areas that are protesting and rioting. These are some major cities, and these conversations are going to spark up. And I think we have to be ready for that when those discussions do come up. And as you said, not, turning a blind eye or a deaf ear to it because you don't understand that, because you've never been put into that position. So maybe it doesn't sit with you that you don't understand, like, the police are beating people up. That never happens. But that person's background, that person's community, it might be commonplace for that to happen. So I think we have to listen to these voices and figure out how to go forward and advocate. Much like Dr. Kilgore said, maybe your advocacy is just sitting and listening and allowing that person to provide that perspective to you of their upbringing and their cultural background and the things that they experience. I mean, we're all shaped by our background. There's things that even I, born and raised, well, I'm from the South, military brat, but I call it, the South home. And listen, I love the South, but there's some things that happened to me and my family that, I've tried to talk about before in the past, and it makes people very uncomfortable. So I tend, when I have the uniform on, to leave those conversations outside, because I don't want it to, especially now as a first shirt, it's not what Moses says, it's always going to be what the shirt said, and that has power and that has weight. So I have to be very cautious about those types of things. But I think now, with social media and the way things are now, these conversations are going to come into the workplace way more often, and we just have to be ready for them.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said that, because I listened to General Goldfein and Chief Wright do their town hall a couple of days ago, and Chief Wright said, there are things that we should not talk about at work, the religious proselytization and some other things that are strictly off limits. But in terms of this topic, Chief Wright made it sound like there is some room for discussion, and I love that we're talking about advocacy and how to listen, how to go about it the right way, because I'd love for us to move the ball, continue to move the ball forward, and maybe in way bigger steps than we've done in the past. So in terms of Sarnellis, you talked about challenges of being an advocate as a military member versus being a civilian, and you kind of kicked off one of our topics, what is there a difference between how you advocate as a military member versus as a civilian? Chaplain Pitts, Dr. Kilgore, I'll turn it over to you to add to that if you'd like.
So from a military perspective about advocacy, so touching base on what Sergeant Ellis mentioned about basically what do we do next, how do we move forward? Because it is going to have a trickle down effect from what people have going on in their personal lives and going into the work life. So we talked about this on a squadron level, group level yesterday, after we had a telecon about organizational cultural change, but the conversation obviously was touched on because of recent events. After the telecon was over, so we were able to talk as squadron and group leaders in a room, and we talked about the way forward, and even, like you said, providing space for grace about difficult conversations that are going to come up in the days and weeks ahead. I was able to share, with these crucial conversations that come up, we need to abide by three principles of communication. We need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, because people want to authentically share from their heart of what they're going through, real stuff, raw things, raw emotions, raw thoughts. And they will use terms, or maybe the tone is not what we would personally accept. But if we abide by those three principles of being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, I think the other person will feel like they're fully heard. And then that will start planting some seeds of trust that will be motivation for organizational change. So that's the professional part, professional part, Air Force part. Personally, I'm just looking for ways to even just reconnect with family. I had a conversation with one of my, Korean/white cousins the other day, and she even apologized to me, but like Sergeant Ellis, I felt uncomfortable. I'm like, sorry. I mean, but we're blood. I mean, we share the same DNA within us. But I got what she was saying though. But I didn't feel any slight or offense whatsoever. So that's the personal side. I think the personal side will provide more crucial opportunities than ever before, but I don't want it to go to the wayside where, say, like I'm wasting it on anger, but using righteous indignation to fuel community building. That's something that I'm looking forward to on my personal space.
Yeah, just adding to what you both have said, that I think we're in an interesting spot as active duty members and as civilian employees in the military and GS and anybody that works for this enterprise, that there is somewhat of a dual role and kind of a dual navigation of, when I'm off work, when I'm on duty, there's different roles, and we have to acknowledge that. One thing that I think we're really good at is talking about resolution of things. There's often, that school of thought that we need to resolve things at the lowest level. And that actually applies advocacy and participation as well, that maybe in some capacities you can't go out and do, what you really want to do, but can you still be an advocate and a participant at a lower level? So within your own family, within your own flight, within your own peer group or supervision, or is there somewhere else that makes sense that you can be an advocate for something that's important to you? And so I think evaluating at what level you can be effective, because it doesn't always have to be, at the biggest or the most extreme level, because sometimes we're just not able to do that and it doesn't make sense for us. And I think in terms of risk, that plays a role. And that's a conversation that I've been having, is a lot of folks, when they talk about advocacy and having this, uncomfortability, that they're afraid of, well, what are the risks of being uncomfortable or making other people uncomfortable? Or what are the risks of making people angry? And my argument to that is, well, what are the risks of not doing anything? What's the risk of not acting? What's the risk of not having that conversation that might make people a little uncomfortable, but it gets you to a place of movement? So I think the risk is really inherent in not doing anything in this scenario that greatly outweighs the risk of doing some things that might be uncomfortable and difficult. We're in a space where we need to embrace that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I love all the perspectives, and it's so neat to me because they're all a little bit different, but they definitely overlap. And I keep coming back to this idea of getting the emotion out, right? Because I teach a course with our Community Listens communication skills training course, and one of the things we talk about is sometimes people just need your presence. Maybe they don't need you to have all the answers for them. Sometimes it's okay just to be there in the moment. And so that the analogy that we use is a balloon. And on an average day, we've got emotion and we've got logical thought, and they kind of share space evenly. But when that emotion gets so abundant, it can cloud logic, right? It can push it into a place where it doesn't really have room to even exist. And sometimes just giving a person the opportunity to speak their truth, to speak their piece, and just using your presence is all it takes to get that emotion out, so that we can start to have this logical dialogue. So I love what everybody's saying in terms of how to have those conversations. And I love that Dr. Kilgore, you talked about advocacy doesn't have to be this big grand gesture. You talked about passive and active, but you also talked about advocating within your family, within your profession, within your social circles. And that's really, I think, where this is going to start. It's not a Facebook post. It's not a rant or a tirade that you nail to the door. It's just a day-to-day conversation with folks and seeing where they're at. And the part of advocacy to me that really appeals to me is, if you're going to be a good advocate, you're able to notice when people are in distress. And so having that empathy and being able to clue in when somebody's not doing really well, that's your time to step in with both ears open, heart open wide, and just hear folks. Now, this has really been an excellent discussion. It gives me a lot of hope for the future. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be, but I think we have a lot of opportunity right now, at least in our corner of the world and at Minot Air Force Base. I am extremely positive. Any last words any of our panel members want to add in? No, so our panel is good to go. Love it. Okay, so just so you're aware, there are a bunch of resources available for our airmen, our civilian employees, our family members. We have Military One Source, we have Equal Opportunity, Civilian EAP, Mental Health Clinic, our chaplains. Of course, our first sergeants. Sergeant Ellis, give a shout out. But again, before we wrap up finally, a big thank you to our panel members, Sergeant Ellis, Chaplain Pitts, Dr. Kilgore. You guys are amazing. I love that we have you in our community. The reason we invite you guys up here to talk to our community is because you are the experts. So thank you for your time today, Team Minot. I'm sure that we have some questions in our community. So again, if you have questions regarding physical, social, spiritual, or emotional, or mental health, please send them in. Go to the Team Minot app, ask the Helping Agencies button, submit your questions to us. We look forward to answering your questions during next week's podcast. Stay safe. Continue to practice appropriate social distancing, even though we're opening the world back up right now. Remember that you matter, and stay Minot strong.